It was a chilly evening in downtown Atlanta, the kind where the wind carried a bite, making people pull their coats a little tighter. Officer Daniel Carter had been patrolling this part of town for years, and by now, he could tell when something didn't quite add up. Tonight it was the sight of a young black girl no older than 14, sitting alone at a nearly empty bus stop. What caught his attention, though, wasn't just her being there. It was the pair of high heels she clutched tightly to her chest, like they were the most precious thing in the world. Something about the way she sat, her shoulders hunched, her gaze darting around, sent a quiet alarm through him. This wasn't the usual scene he'd come across. She wasn't just waiting for a bus. She was scared. Officer Carter pulled his cruiser to the side, his headlights illuminating the cracked pavement in front of the bus stop. As he stepped out, he kept his tone calm, approachable. "Hey there, miss, you waiting for someone?" The girl flinched at his voice, her fingers tightening around the shoes. Her face was partially hidden beneath the hood of her oversized sweatshirt, but he could see the worry in her eyes. She shook her head quickly. "No, sir, just waiting for the bus." The answer was simple enough, but something in the way she said it made him pause. She wasn't just waiting, she was hoping. Hoping for what? He wasn't sure yet. His radio crackled softly in the background as he crouched slightly to her level. "It's pretty late, where are you heading?" Again, hesitation. A deep breath. "Home." But Carter could tell she wasn't telling the whole truth. His years on the force had taught him how to read people, especially kids. She was nervous, maybe even scared of him. Not an uncommon reaction, he knew, but this felt different. She wasn't just wary of him. She was wary of something else. He glanced down at the high heels she clung to so tightly. They weren't the kind of shoes a young girl would normally carry around like that. They were fancy, too fancy for the old sneakers she wore on her feet. The contrast between the two was striking, unsettling even. "Those yours?" he asked, nodding toward them. She looked down at them as if she'd forgotten they were even in her hands. "No," she whispered. That single word set off something deep in Carter's gut. There was a story here, one she wasn't ready to tell. He scanned the area, the dim streetlights casting long shadows over the pavement. The bus stop was nearly deserted, just an older man flipping through a newspaper a few seats down and a distant figure walking briskly across the street. Carter's training told him not to press too hard, not yet. Instead, he softened his voice. "Did someone give them to you?" The girl shook her head again. This time she swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the road as if she were searching for an escape. A sinking feeling settled in his chest. Something wasn't right. Then, just as he was about to ask another question, his radio crackled to life. It was dispatch, calling in about a missing person, someone matching the girl's description. Carter's jaw tightened. He took a slow breath, steadying himself. He wasn't sure what he had just stepped into, but one thing was clear. This girl wasn't just waiting for a bus. She was running from something, and whatever it was, it had just caught up to her. Carter's pulse quickened as he adjusted the radio on his shoulder, trying not to let the girl see the change in his demeanor. The description from dispatch was too precise to be a coincidence. Young black female around 14, last seen wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He stole another glance at her. Same hoodie, same jeans, same uneasy expression. But something wasn't adding up. If she was reported missing, why was she here alone, clutching those high heels like they were her lifeline? The girl must have noticed his shift in energy because she gripped the shoes even tighter, her small fingers pressing into the soft material. She wasn't just holding on to them, she was clinging to them, like they were the only thing she had left. Carter took a slow breath, keeping his voice calm. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the street again. She was thinking about running. He could see it, the way her legs tensed, how she angled, her body slightly away from him. He'd seen it before in kids who were scared out of their minds. He took a small step back, giving her space. "I'm not here to get you in trouble," he added. "I just want to make sure you're safe." Still, no answer, Then, after what felt like forever, she whispered, "Ava." It wasn't much, but it was something. Carter nodded, his expression softening. "Okay, Ava, that's a pretty name." He let the silence settle for a beat before speaking again. "Listen, I just heard something come through on my radio. Sounds like someone might be looking for you." Ava flinched, her entire body tensing. That reaction told him everything. Someone was looking for her. But she didn't want to be found. Carter kept his voice steady, careful. "I don't know who called it in, but if someone's worried about you, maybe we can figure this out together. You got family nearby?" Ava shook her head. "No." "No one you can call?" Again, she shook her head. Carter studied her for a moment. She wasn't just some runaway kid who got lost in the city. This was something else, something deeper. A sharp gust of wind rattled a loose street sign, the metal clanking against the pole. Ava flinched again. She was on edge. And now so was he. He glanced at the shoes in her hands once more. They weren't the kind of shoes a kid would wear to school or even to a regular event. They were elegant, expensive looking, too grown up for her. "Where'd you get those, Ava?" he asked gently. Her lips parted like she wanted to answer, but then she clamped them shut. Carter felt the tension thick in the air. He had to tread carefully. A car rolled past slowly, its headlights sweeping over them. Ava turned her head just slightly, her gaze following it. Carter noticed how her breathing quickened, how her fingers flexed against the heels as if she were preparing for something. The car kept going, disappearing around the corner, but Ava didn't relax. Carter had been doing this long enough to know what that meant. She wasn't just nervous. She was afraid of someone. He shifted slightly, angling himself so he wasn't blocking her path, but still close enough to step in if she bolted. "Ava, if you're in trouble, I can help." She looked up at him then, really looked at him. Her dark eyes were wide, searching, weighing her options. For a second, he thought she might say something, but then his radio crackled again. Another update. The missing persons report had just been updated with more details. The caller had been a woman and she had been frantic. She had given the police one very specific instruction. "Please, just bring my daughter home." Carter barely had time to process the words before Ava took a step back. "I have to go," she whispered. Carter held up his hands. "Ava, wait." But it was too late. She turned on her heel and ran. Carter's heart pounded as he watched her sprint toward the nearest alleyway, her hoodie billowing behind her. Who was she running from, and why didn't she want to go home? Carter's instincts kicked in the moment Ava bolted. His first thought was to chase after her, but something held him back. If she was running, she had a reason. And if he came at her like a cop chasing a suspect, she'd only run harder. Instead, he grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I made contact with the missing juvenile, but she took off. Last seen heading west through the alley behind 5th and Oak. I need backup." The response came quickly. "Copy that. Units en route." Carter started moving, following the direction Ava had gone, but keeping his distance. The alley was narrow and dimly lit, lined with dumpsters and old brick buildings that looked like they'd been standing for a century. He stepped carefully, listening. A faint sound, quick, shallow breathing. She was close, hiding. He slowed his pace, his voice steady but soft. "Ava, I know you're scared, but I promise, I'm not here to hurt you." Silence. Then, from behind a stack of wooden pallets, a whisper. "Go away." Carter stopped a few feet away, crouching slightly to make himself less intimidating. "I can't do that, kid. Someone called looking for you. Your mom, maybe?" Ava didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was tight, almost shaking. "She's not my mom." That threw him. Carter frowned, trying to piece it together. "But she said..." "She's lying." Ava cut him off. "I don't belong to her." Carter's stomach knotted. Something was very wrong. If the woman who reported her missing wasn't really her mother, then who was she? And why did Ava seem more afraid of being found than being alone in the streets at night? His radio crackled again. "Officer Carter, be advised. The reporting party is on her way to your location. She insisted on being there when the girl is found." Carter tightened his grip on the radio. "Copy that." Ava must have overheard because suddenly she pushed out from behind the pallets, her eyes wild with panic. "You can't let her take me." Carter held up a hand, his own pulse quickening. "Ava, slow down, talk to me." "Who is she?" The girl shook her head furiously. "She's not my mom. She took me." The words hit Carter like a brick. He had suspected something was off, but this was worse than he thought. "How long ago?" he asked, keeping his voice calm, even though his mind was racing. Ava swallowed hard. "Almost a year." "A year? A whole year?" Carter felt a chill run through him. This wasn't a simple missing person case, this was something much darker. Ava's hands were trembling as she clutched the high heels to her chest again. "She makes me..." She stopped herself, looking away, her jaw tight. "She says I have to look nice, that I have to be ready." Carter's throat went dry. He didn't need to hear the rest to understand. His radio crackled once more. "Officer Carter, the reporting party is about 3 minutes out. Do you have eyes on the juvenile?" He glanced at Ava, who stood there frozen, her entire body tense. He pressed the button on his radio, never breaking eye contact with her. "Negative. Still searching." Ava's eyes widened slightly, her breath hitching. Carter gave her the smallest nod. She understood. He wasn't turning her over. He took a slow step forward, speaking low. "Ava, I need you to trust me. If what you're saying is true, I won't let her take you, but I need to get you somewhere safe, okay?" Ava hesitated. Then, finally, she gave a small nod. Carter exhaled, his mind already working through what needed to be done. He had to get her out of here before the woman arrived. But where? He couldn't take her to the station, not yet. Not if the woman had already reported her missing. His options were running out. Then, the sound of tires screeching. Carter turned just in time to see a sleek black car pull up at the curb near the alley entrance. A woman stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. She was well-dressed, her blonde hair swept into a neat bun, her expression a perfect mask of concern. But her eyes, they were cold, calculating. Carter had seen eyes like that before. She was dangerous, and she was here for Ava. Carter felt the tension coil in his chest as the woman stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Her movements were precise, controlled like someone who was used to getting what she wanted. She scanned the alley quickly before her eyes landed on him. "Officer," she said smoothly, offering a strained smile. "Thank goodness, I was so worried." Carter didn't move. He could feel Ava just behind him, barely breathing. He knew if he turned around, he'd see pure terror on her face. The woman's eyes flicked past him, searching. She tilted her head slightly. "Is she here?" Carter didn't answer right away. He was still studying her, reading her body language. The way her fingers twitched like she was holding back frustration. The way she shifted her weight slightly, ready to react. "She's scared," Carter finally said, keeping his voice steady. "She says you're not her mother." The woman let out a soft, breathy laugh, shaking her head. "Oh dear, I can only imagine what she's been telling you. Poor thing has been through so much." She sighed dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest. "It's been a difficult time for both of us." Carter didn't blink. He had dealt with liars before, but this was different. She wasn't just lying, she was performing. Every movement, every word was carefully measured. "She says she was taken," he said, watching her closely. "That she's been missing for a year." For the briefest second, something flickered in the woman's expression. Annoyance? Fear? But it was gone so quickly, replaced by a look of practiced sadness. "She's confused," the woman said with a small, pitying smile. "She ran away, officer. I've been trying to bring her home, but she's scared to face the truth. She's been through so much, and sometimes Trauma makes children say things that aren't true. Carter heard movement behind him. Ava. He didn't turn, but he could feel her anxiety rising. He needed to keep her calm. The woman took a step, closer, her voice softening. "Please let me take her home, she belongs with me." Carter's grip on his belt tightened. Every instinct he had told him not to let this woman anywhere near Ava. "Do you have any paperwork? Adoption records? Guardianship papers?" he asked. The woman's smile faltered for just a moment before she quickly recovered. "Of course. Not on me, but I can get them. This all happened so suddenly I rushed over as soon as I heard." Carter's radio crackled. "Officer Carter, update? Do you have the juvenile?" The woman's expression sharpened. She was waiting for his answer. Carter reached for his radio, his eyes never leaving hers. "Still searching," he said, his voice firm. The woman's jaw tightened. Ava let out a shaky breath behind him. Carter could feel the weight of her trust, the way she was depending on him. He turned slightly, just enough to glance at her over his shoulder. "Ava," he said gently, "is there anyone I can call? Someone you trust?" Ava was shaking her head before he even finished the question. "No," she whispered. Carter's stomach sank. If this woman wasn't her mother, if Ava had truly been taken, who else was out there looking for her? The woman sighed, her patience wearing thin. "Officer, I really must insist." Carter raised a hand, cutting her off. "You said she ran away. When was the last time you saw her?" The woman hesitated. It was slight, almost unnoticeable, but Carter caught it. "About a month ago," she said finally. "She's been bouncing from place to place." Ava let out a choked sound. Carter turned his head slightly, just enough, to see her shake her head. "She's lying," Ava murmured, her voice barely above a breath. Carter felt his pulse pound in his ears. He already knew that. But now he had confirmation. The woman must have realized the shift because she took another step forward, her voice turning urgent. "You don't understand, officer. She needs to come home. She's not safe out here." Carter met her eyes. "You're right, she's not." The woman stilled. Carter's radio crackled again. "Backup is 2 minutes out." The woman's eyes darkened. Carter saw the exact moment she realized she was running out of time. And then, she moved. Fast. Too fast. Carter barely had time to react before she lunged, her hand reaching for Ava. Ava screamed, and just like that, everything exploded into chaos. Carter's instincts took over in an instant. As the woman lunged, his arm shot out, blocking her from getting anywhere near Ava. She stumbled back, her face twisting in frustration, but Carter stepped between them, his stance firm. "Back up," he ordered, his voice sharper now. He wasn't playing along with her act anymore. Ava clutched his sleeve, her breath shaky. "Don't let her take me," she whispered. Carter didn't look back, but he gave the smallest nod. "You're okay," he said, keeping his eyes locked on the woman. She straightened her coat, quickly smoothing her expression, but it was too late. The mask had slipped, even if only for a second. Her eyes burned with anger now, her polite smile gone. "I don't think you understand what you're doing, officer," she said, her voice low. Carter took a step forward, his own voice just as firm. "No, I understand perfectly." The woman's hand curled into a fist, her nails digging into her palm. And then, before he could react, she did something that made Carter's blood turn ice cold. She smiled, not the fake, worried mother act from before. Not frustration at being challenged, it was something else, something calculated. And then she turned her head slightly, like she was looking past him. That was when Carter felt it. The shift in the air, the sudden awareness prickling at the back of his neck. They weren't alone. He barely had time to register it before he heard the sound. Tires screeching, doors slamming, more people. Carter turned just as a black SUV pulled up at the mouth of the alley. The windows were tinted, impossible to see inside, but the second the vehicle stopped, 2 men stepped out, both in dark suits, both moving with the same kind of confidence the woman had. Carter's gut twisted. This wasn't just some desperate woman trying to snatch a runaway. This was bigger, organized, planned. The woman exhaled like she had just won. "Officer," she said smoothly, "I really don't think you want to make this difficult." Carter's grip tightened at his side. His backup was still a minute away. He could handle one person, but three, in an alley with a terrified kid clinging to him? His mind raced. The two men were approaching now, slow and deliberate, as if they weren't worried about a thing. They weren't armed, not visibly at least, but Carter knew better than to assume they weren't dangerous. "Hand her over," the woman continued, her tone almost lazy now. "And we can forget this ever happened." Carter let out a breath, steadying himself. Then he made a choice. "Run," he murmured to Ava. Ava's fingers tightened on his sleeve. "What?" His eyes never left the men. "Run. Now." For a second, she didn't move. Then realization hit, and she bolted. The woman's expression snapped into rage. "Get her!" One of the men moved instantly, breaking into a sprint after Ava. Carter didn't think. He moved first. He slammed into the man, knocking him hard against the brick wall. The impact sent a shock through Carter's shoulder, but he didn't care. The man grunted, trying to push off, but Carter pinned him. Ava was running, her sneakers slapping against the pavement. She was fast, but the alley only had so many exits. The second man was already moving to cut her off. Carter's pulse thundered in his ears. He had to stop him, but before he could make a move, a car horn blared, loud, close. And then, tires screeching. Carter turned just in time to see it. A second car, this one an old blue sedan, swerving into the alley. The door flew open before the vehicle even fully stopped, and then, a voice. "Ava, get in!" Carter's heart nearly stopped. Someone else was here, someone who knew Ava, and judging by the way her head whipped around, she knew them too. She hesitated for only a second before sprinting straight for the car. The woman's scream filled the alley. "No!" But it was too late. Ava threw herself into the sedan, the door slamming shut behind her. The driver floored it. The tires screeched again, smoke kicking up as the car peeled out of the alley, disappearing into the night. Gone. Ava was gone. And now, Carter was alone. He barely had time to register what had just happened before the woman turned on him, her expression pure fury. The two men recovered fast, stepping forward, their movements less controlled now. Carter braced himself. His backup was almost here. He just had to hold them off a little longer, but then the woman did something he didn't expect. She smiled again, and then she took a step back. So did the men. Carter's breathing was heavy, his muscles tense, but they weren't making a move toward him anymore. The woman dusted off her sleeve like none of this had even happened. Then, with that same eerie calmness, she looked him dead in the eye. "You have no idea what you just did," she murmured. Carter didn't respond. She took another step back, then turned, and, without another word, she walked toward the black SUV. The men followed. A second later, they were gone. Carter stood in the alley, his heartbeat still slamming in his chest. The distant sound of sirens finally reached his ears, his backup. But all he could think about was Ava. Where had she gone? Who had taken her? And most of all, why did it feel like this wasn't over? Carter stood frozen in the alley, his breath heavy as the wail of sirens grew louder. His backup was seconds away, but the SUV carrying the mysterious woman and her men had already disappeared into the night. Ava was gone too, but at least this time, it seemed like she had chosen to leave. The real question was, who had picked her up? And were they actually taking her to safety, or had she just traded one nightmare for another? As the squad cars skidded to a stop, officers jumped out, their flashlights sweeping the alley. Carter held up a hand, steadying himself as he turned to face them. "She's gone," he said, his voice rough. One of the officers, Lieutenant Harris, stepped forward. "Gone? What do you mean? Who took her?" Carter ran a hand over his face. A black sedan. Someone she recognized. I don't know who, but she trusted them. Harris frowned. And the woman? Vanished. With backup. This wasn't just some random incident. They were organized, they knew exactly what they were doing. Harris cursed under his breath before signaling to the other officers to fan out. We'll put an alert out for the car and the girl. What do we know about her? Carter exhaled, shaking his head. Not enough. She said she was taken a year ago, but no last name, no city. She was terrified of that woman. And something tells me this goes deeper than just a missing child case. Harris nodded grimly. Let's check the cameras. If that sedan was caught, on any street cams, we'll track it down. Carter didn't waste any time. The next hour was a blur of checking surveillance footage, making calls, and running searches through every missing persons database he could access. But nothing matched Ava. No missing reports, no leads. It was like she didn't exist until a hit finally came through. Ava Monroe, reported missing from Atlanta, Georgia, a year ago. Last seen leaving school. No confirmed sightings since. The case had gone cold. Carter's stomach twisted as he read through the details. There had been no ransom demand, no witnesses, no evidence of where she had gone. Her foster mother had searched for months, but eventually, the case faded into the background like so many others. Foster care. That meant Ava had no immediate family. So who had just taken her? Just as that thought settled in his mind, another officer rushed over. We found the car. Carter's pulse jumped. Where? Abandoned at a gas station 2 miles from here. No sign of the girl. Carter's gut clenched. Someone had switched vehicles, which meant they knew they were being tracked. But why go through all that trouble if they had been trying to save Ava? Or had they? Something wasn't adding up. Carter grabbed his keys and headed for his cruiser. Get me the security footage from that gas station. If they switched cars, I want to know what they left in. Minutes later, he was speeding toward the location. His mind raced through every possibility. If this had been a normal trafficking case, why would they let her escape? Why send men in suits instead of using a more discreet approach? When he arrived at the gas station, officers were already reviewing the camera footage. Carter leaned in, watching the grainy black and white footage. The sedan pulled in. Ava got out hesitantly, looking around, then a man, tall, wearing a hood, stepped forward. He said something to her and she nodded. A second later, she climbed into another vehicle, a dark blue truck, and then they were gone. Carter froze, because he recognized that truck. He had seen it before, in a case. His blood ran cold. It belonged to Daniel Monroe, Ava's biological father, a man who had been arrested 5 years ago for fraud, identity theft, and suspected involvement in a larger criminal network. He had vanished after serving 2 years, disappearing without a trace. And now somehow, he had found his daughter. Carter straightened, his mind spinning. If Monroe had been involved in something serious before, had Ava been taken as leverage? Was she being hidden from someone even more dangerous? Or was she running straight back into the arms of the very people who had put her in danger? One thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not even close. Carter gripped the edge of the desk as he stared at the footage. His mind raced with questions, each one leading to another dead end. Ava Monroe had been missing for a year, taken from a life that had already been unstable, and now she had vanished again, this time willingly. But had she made the right choice? His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he ran Daniel Monroe's name through every law enforcement database. The man had disappeared after his release, his trail going cold. No known address, no financial activity. It was as if he had never existed. But then something strange happened. A ping, a single, small transaction. A gas station purchase from 2 weeks ago, just outside of town. Monroe had been here, close. Carter's chest tightened. If Monroe had been searching for Ava, why hadn't he come forward? Why hadn't he reported her missing or fought to get her back? Unless he had been the one hiding her all along. A new thought settled uneasily in Carter's mind. Had Ava really been taken a year ago? Or had she been hidden for her own protection? Carter picked up his phone and called Harris. "I have a lead. Daniel Monroe. He picked Ava up at the gas station. I think he's been moving under the radar, but he's still around. I need to find him." Harris exhaled on the other end. "We'll put out feelers, but if he's been this good at staying off the grid, he won't make it easy." Carter already knew that. Check traffic cams near that gas station. He had to take a main road eventually. An hour later, the results came in. The truck had been picked up heading south, just outside city limits, before turning onto a remote road leading into the woods. Carter didn't wait. He got in his cruiser and drove, the road stretching endlessly ahead of him. Trees lined both sides, the setting sun casting long shadows across the pavement. The further he went, the more his gut twisted. Then up ahead he saw it. A small cabin nestled between trees barely visible from the road. And parked outside, Monroe's truck. Carter pulled off to the side, stepping out slowly. The air was still, the kind of silence that made his instincts buzz. He approached the cabin cautiously, his hand hovering near his holster, but before he could knock, the door creaked open. Ava stood there. She wasn't running this time. She wasn't shaking or afraid. She just looked at him, her dark eyes filled with something unreadable. "You found me?" she said quietly. Carter nodded. "Yeah." A voice from inside made Ava glance back. A man stepped into view, older than Carter had expected, his beard streaked with gray, his stance guarded. Daniel Monroe. Carter's grip tightened, but he didn't reach for his weapon. "Daniel Monroe?" Monroe studied him, then nodded. "She told me about you." Carter glanced at Ava. "You okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I am now." Carter exhaled, trying to piece it all together. "What's going on here?" Monroe stepped forward, folding his arms. "I didn't take my daughter. I was trying to save her." Carter's jaw clenched. "From who?" "The people who had her," Monroe said, his voice low. "They weren't just traffickers. They were connected to something bigger. I used to be part of it, back when I made a lot of bad choices. When I got out of prison, I thought I was done with that life, but they weren't done with me." Ava's fingers curled around the doorframe. "They took me to punish him, to make sure he never talked." Carter's stomach twisted. "And the woman?" "She worked for them," Monroe confirmed. "She's one of the ones who makes sure people like me stay in line." Carter exhaled, his thoughts racing. If what Monroe was saying was true, this wasn't just about one missing girl. This was about an entire operation, one that had powerful people covering their tracks. He looked at Ava. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked away. "Because I didn't know who to trust, and because I knew if I went back with you, they'd find me again." Carter ran a hand over his face. He wanted to argue, to tell her she could have been safe with him, but the truth was, she was probably right. If those people had reach, they could find her anywhere. "So what now?" he asked, looking at Monroe. "You gonna keep running?" Monroe shook his head. "No, I'm done running. I have a plan. I just needed to get Ava first." Carter frowned. "What kind of plan?" Monroe hesitated, then pulled out a small flash drive from his pocket. "The kind that ends this." Carter stared at it. "What's on there?" "Everything," Monroe said. "Records, names, transactions, proof. I've been collecting it for years, waiting for the right time." Carter's heartbeat picked up. If Monroe really had that kind of evidence, this could take down more than just a few criminals. It could expose an entire network. But it also meant Monroe and Ava were in even more danger now. Carter looked between them, weighing his options. He could take Monroe in, turn the flash drive over to the department, let the legal system handle it. But if the people Monroe was talking about had the kind of reach he claimed, they'd bury the evidence before it ever saw the light of day, or he could help them. Carter exhaled. "You got a safe place to go?" Monroe nodded. "For now." Carter thought for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Harris," he said when the line picked up. "I lost the lead. No sign of the girl or the truck." He met Monroe's eyes. I think they're long gone. Harris sighed on the other end. Damn it. All right, we'll keep looking. Carter hung up, sliding his phone back into his pocket. Monroe studied him carefully. You didn't have to do that. Carter shrugged. Just make sure that flash drive gets where it needs to go. Monroe nodded. It will. Ava stepped forward, her voice soft. Thank you. Carter looked at her, seeing something different in her now. She wasn't just a scared girl at a bus stop anymore. She was someone who had survived things most people never would. He gave her a small nod. Be safe. Ava hesitated, then for the first time smiled, and with that she and her father disappeared into the night. Carter stood there for a long time after they left, the weight of what had just happened settling over him. He didn't know what the future held for them, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just another case, this was a story he would never forget.